Bartholomeo, written by Johnny Fist. Bartholomeo von Matt was a well-known rake and womanizer who liked to call on ladies of every age. His list of conquests included both very young girls of 14, naive enough to believe a 40-year-old count's gallant words, and elderly matrons who had little left to look forward to in life beyond their final breath. Count von Matt knew how to win women's trust, lavishly, willingly, and with particular polish. Men, on the other hand, did not care for him. Not that there was open enmity between them. Outwardly, they maintained quite cordial relations. But while they were still raising a glass or stealing a glance at some young flesh that had fluttered in to make herself known for future acquaintance, Bartholomeo was already beside her, promising not only to introduce her to the most distinguished gentlemen, but to personally present her to each of them. By the time his companions took another sip, von Matt was already leading his new prey away. She was doomed, as so many before her had been. There was nothing unusual about it. Those were the times. Whoever first found the audacity declared war on the neighboring kingdom. Von Matt was no warrior, though. He was a lover. He preferred to resolve matters under a soft blanket rather than knee-deep in a muddy trench. Occasionally he might retreat, but only when he saw the chance of a greater victory ahead. Even so, he was not always vigilant. This story is about the final chapter of Bartholomeo von Matt's life, which, by a strange coincidence, did not occur 30 or 40 years after the events described, but at precisely the same time. When summer was at its hottest, the Count was in his prime, and the city was teeming with fresh young ladies come for the season to secure an advantageous match. They all had a future until they met von Matt. He was like a black mark, spoken of, known about, warned against and carefully avoided, and yet somehow every girl longed to see him, if only for a moment. That was all von Matt ever needed. Once caught in his snare, none escaped. The future ceased to exist. On a sultry July Saturday, Baroness de Vliet was hosting a ball. She had her reasons. Her niece had come of age and was ready to find a husband. 15 was, after all, the age when one must fly from the maternal nest, build one's own, and become, if not a loving wife, at least a respectable mistress of the house. Like any woman of sense, the Baroness had warned young Greta about Count von Matt, forbidding her in the strictest terms even to greet him. She spent an entire evening explaining why not every man who approached her saw in her a future bride. "You are young, beautiful, and foolish," she said, at one point even calling her a little simpleton. The Baroness meant no insult, only to make clear the dangers of a misstep she desperately wished her niece to avoid. The conversation drained the Baroness of all strength, and she retired to rest, exhausted by the day and the oppressive heat. The day of the ball arrived. Gentlemen, both young and decidedly not, gathered at the de Vliet estate. Some could offer youth and moderate wealth, others, old men, had neither, but society demanded that even widowers keep a wife. An old man without one was like a bird without wings, still able to run perhaps, but clearly incomplete. Groups formed more by age than by rank or experience, and the talk of potential matches varied accordingly. The younger men glanced about nervously, their heads twitching in whichever direction a beauty might appear. The ladies were discussed with enthusiasm and longing. Each man had his own tastes and opinions, yet the young were shy and uncertain. Those escorted by their mothers fared better, though the experience was mortifying. A mother would sneak up behind her son, murmur an apology to the group, drag him off by the arm to scold him, fix his collar, and warn him to behave, for he was about to be introduced to a fine match. His companions, of course, snickered and jeered as he was led away. If the match succeeded, if there were dances, smiles, and a mutual spark, envy replaced ridicule. But if the attempt failed, the poor fellow's return to the circle was met with mockery so sharp it was better to slip away and spend the rest of the evening alone. Among the older men, things were calmer. They did not dart their eyes about. They knew every mother in the room, and through them every daughter's lineage. Discussing pedigrees as though they were racehorses, they decided who might make a suitable relative. Debts, obligations, and family alliances all came into play. Once a gentleman determined that a girl was a fit match, he wasted no time. He would set down his glass, approach, introduce himself, though everyone knew who he was, and invite her to dance. During the dance, he would state his intentions plainly. These were not meant for flirtation or riddles. The briefer the words, the better. Afterward, he would escort the lady to her mother, in full view of the room, and declare that he would call the next day upon her father to ask for her hand. Resistance was futile. Such was the case with young Ninelle. Count Grigori approached her, and all went as described. Formally engaged, she only had to finish the evening gracefully and go home to prepare for her new life. 16 years old, beautiful and trusting, Ninelle nevertheless felt she might have done better. She longed for someone younger, handsomer, not an old man with money, merely seeking companionship in his twilight years. So she continued chatting with others, smiling sweetly out of habit. Fatefully, von Matt arrived late that night, something he rarely did, for he knew that in the first hour all the prettiest girls might be spoken for. But cards had delayed him. There had been a considerable sum at stake, and he could not leave the game unfinished. When he finally entered the ballroom, whispers spread instantly. He is here. Mothers pointed him out to their daughters, warning them never to speak to him. Ninelle's mother, however, elated by her daughter's successful match, was too giddy to notice. Von Matt moved through the crowd with his usual unhurried grace, scanning for potential prey. Men turned away, while young ladies, held back by their anxious mothers, tried to steal a glance at the infamous seducer. Bartholomeo was used to it. He knew the hens could never hide all their chicks. And sure enough, this time the chick was Ninelle. She stood in a distant room, engaged in pleasant conversation, when von Matt approached from behind. The moment she saw him, her heart quickened. Here, at last, was exactly the sort of man she had imagined for herself. Elegant, handsome, and perfectly mannered, Bartholomeo read all this in her eyes at once, and began his game. Within 10 minutes she was completely in his power. She no longer remembered the ball, nor how she had agreed to go with him. He led her deep into the garden, away from curious eyes speaking of constellations and how the stars could guide one to love. Ninelle was intoxicated by him, his voice, his gestures, his words. That was all von Matt ever needed. The further they walked, the darker it grew. Soon her skirts were lifted, his trousers undone. Bartholomeo was passionately teaching Ninelle about love. She tried to stifle her cries, but it was her first time, and silence was impossible. Such was von Matt's power. He knew it and took pride in it. But misfortune struck. Count Grigori, with several friends, decided to stroll through the garden to discuss business privately. As they wandered, they first heard the sounds, then saw von Matt's head moving among the shadows. At first, nothing unusual. Such scenes were not rare at balls. A male had found his prey, but Count Brolski, approaching from another path, came up to Grigori and subtly urged him to look closer to see who the girl was. Grigori hesitated, unwilling to witness such filth, but his friend's insistence prevailed. He crept nearer and saw that the infamous seducer was defiling the very girl who, an hour earlier, had agreed to become his wife. The old count flushed crimson. Humiliation burned through him. He imagined the laughter that would follow him everywhere, in salons, barracks, banquet halls, forever branded the cuckolded fool. Even before the act was finished, he had become the evening's jest. The lovers had not yet noticed him. Slowly, he drew the pistol he still carried from his army days, always at his belt when he went out. He aimed at von Matt and fired without hesitation. Ninelle did not at first understand why the body collapsed onto her, covering her face with blood. Then she saw the pistol pointed at her. There was no time to comprehend. A second shot, and the second participant in the disgrace lay dead. The count calmly holstered his weapon and returned to his friends, whose looks of mockery had turned to approval. Servants and the Baroness soon rushed out. She saw the Count's company first, then the bodies. No explanation was needed. She ordered the servants to carry the corpses to the gazebo and sent for Ninel's mother. Nothing would happen to the Count. This was a matter of honor. If anyone was at risk, it was Ninel's father, should gossip spread. But the Baroness was an experienced woman. She managed to smooth everything over. Thus ended the passionate life of Bartholomeo von Matt. He had always suspected it might end this way, sooner or later, yet he had believed that an angel watched over him, a creature who loved him. After all, it is not only beautiful young women who love scoundrels.